So my name is Joran Mandik. I am an urban designer and urban planner by training, and have been a member of the Floating as well since 2018, so since it started. And my involvement with it now is that I am a producer, which basically means looking at our budget a lot. I look at Excel, turns out I like that too. I also host a lot, external program, but you'll understand what all of that means a little bit later. You go.
Yeah, okay, my name is Jeanne Astrup-Chauveau, and I'm also part of Floating since the beginning, so since 2018. I am a trained architect, and I work mostly at the intersection of performance and urban practices, and I think this whole unites into Floating University, so I'm really happy that we are invited tonight to present this special place. I hope you get kind of a feeling after an hour of us talking about of what it means to float or to be there. Therefore, I would suggest we dive into it.
I have one question before we start.
One question.
Prague is not too far from Berlin, so maybe it's worth asking, has anyone been to Floating before?
Wow. 2.
2 people out of 120 plus?
3, 4.
3. Okay.
I can do better.
2 people plus 2 shy people? Very good. Also, does anyone know how to do full screen on this? It's fine, no?
I mean, does anyone know how to do full screen on this? It's a real question to the audience.
Yeah. Do you know?
Full screen?
How to make this full screen? I don't know. Wait, this looks promising.
And the sound?
Wait. Control.
First okay.
Full screen mode, how about this? But anyway, we need to get out of that again.
Yeah, that was a good try. So we'd like to start tonight with something that's maybe a bit unusual, seeing the quite classical setting we're in. So this is super frontal, and we'll ask you now to either close your eyes or lean back in your seat. We're taking you into a soundscape of Floating University. This will last about 2 minutes. So it's quite long, but that's what it takes to really arrive. And that's, I think, quite necessary when...
There's a motto at Floating that you can see here. Only here can you be here. So we're not there right now, but hopefully you listening to this soundscape for a couple minutes will ground you a little bit more. So feel invited to close your eyes. We'll do that too. And be transported to Berlin in June this year. Okay, welcome. We've arrived. Maybe we can ask you, did anyone hear anything? Quick show of hands if you have an idea. What did we hear? I know, it's scary. There's 120 people in the room. Crows or ravens? It's crows, in fact, yeah. Yeah, that's true. Maybe some swallows. Right, we also heard some noise. Last time I did this exercise with another group, they thought it was a street, but actually it's just a little rolly wagon that we transport heavy stuff with. So you couldn't hear any cars. And I think that soundscape is a little bit different to this university here, at least while we're inside. Take it away.
Yeah, so only here you can be here. Now you're halfway there, I'd say. And to situate a bit where Floating actually lies, it's in Berlin. And more precisely, really next to the former Tempelhof airfield. So probably you've heard about it, and if not, it's not, it's okay. But just so you know, Floating University is obviously marked with this red circle, and what you see, this big surface, is what used to be an airfield until 2008. Now this is what Tempelhof looks like. It's one of the biggest inner city green park in Europe, so it's quite of an impressive place to visit. I really recommend. And so this is kind of the attention catcher, and now we have Floating University, which is a very small drop of water on the map on the north. And what it does, it's actually a rainwater retention pond, which means it's a fully functioning infrastructure of a city. And it's one that you can find in many cities. You can also find many of them in Berlin. But the one we're speaking of is there to collect the rainwater that falls onto the roof of this former airport building, which is one of the longest buildings in Europe. So it's quite a big amount of rainwater at once, and of the nearby streets and of the neighborhood. And so it's a storm basin, which means the water is collected and then eventually flows further into the canal and into the Spree River. So let's say now we take the water journey. You just fall, like any rainwater drop, and then with everything you can catch on the road or onto this like old, maybe decaying roof of the buildings, everything you take with you. So it can be like cigarette butts or just tires, dust from the road, or plastic, microplastic. All of this you take with you through underground sewage system. And eventually you arrive after about 2.5 kilometers at Floating University. So what you see here are a few kids from our kids program and some Floating Association member. And this is how it looked like when Floating first, or when the basin first was discovered, let's say in 2017. It's quite of something you wouldn't say is only like an infrastructure. Something happened in between, right? So there was water, and now there's much more than water. There's also an entire ecosystem. Looking from the bird view again, that's in the 40s. So the basin was built in the 30s. So in the 40s, it looked like this. And then it remained quite unchanged. We see a few sports fields around. And then it remains quite similar. You can see that its surface is quite plain, like it looks only like asphalt. And then slowly, 2010s, 2012, 2014, we see the beginning of what seems to be a biotope, a reed bed, what will become at some point the biggest reed bed in Kreuzberg. Reed, I'm not sure if it's something you're familiar with. It's like this long grass that grows in wetland or in wet habitat. I don't know the name in other languages, but let's say reed. And this is really linked with the fact that the airport actually closed in 2008. And this being an infrastructure linked to the airport, it somehow went off the radar after a few years. And it developed until 2018, when, let's say, it reached one of its earliest peak, and Floating University landed as well. So it landed like this in 2018. It was a project started by Raumlabor. It had, I think, quite a good resonance. We had a lot of programs, we will talk about it later, different spaces. And at this point, it was what we called an offshore laboratory for cities in transformation. So let's say the focus was set on imagining new urban futures, really linked to a specific site with topic like water filtration, collective learning process. And it was called University. And today we are talking about learning with the trouble, because it's kind of like this red or silver lining that goes through the project. And so 2018, it was quite packed. The structure were quite dense. We had over 10,000 people in the summer, which for a little water pond was not so bad. And then we had to make this jump from being maybe merely a project, and at this time we were still called Floating University Berlin. At some point we had to strike through university. This is another story, maybe we'll come to this later in the discussion. And we became an association.
I think we can tell the story now. So we were called Floating University during the first year until someone knocked on our door and said, hang on, you're not an actual university, you're not allowed to call yourself that, because it turns out it's a protected term, which costs around 100,000 euros to have, and we didn't have that, and also we didn't want to play that game, and so we actually had a whole process of trying to find a new term, right, a new name. There was like a list of literally 100 words that could substitute for university, and in the end we just landed on this version with the university struck through, which I think is quite elegant, and it shows the process, right? It shows this this funny little history.
And we have this one saying, which is only here you can be here, this you know, and we also have, we're not floating and we're not a university. So
yeah, it turns out we're also not floating. It's a double lie. We're just standing on the concrete. So sorry to lie to you, but it's true. Right, so now we're in association, right? We were only ever going to be there from May to October, the first year, as a temporary, in-between use project. That's all we had the permits for, that's all we had the vision for, and then this first year was a huge success, and we said, no, we cannot leave. We have to come back. And to be able to do that, and to be able to apply for funding and all of this, you need to be an entity. And so we decided to incorporate as an association, and an association for common good, which means that we have special tax status and can apply for some things others can't apply for. Okay, so maybe we can explain a little bit how we're organized as this association. We are a group of, now we're like 55 or so members, of which maybe 30 are quite actively involved. So some of these 50 were more involved in the first years and not so much anymore because they moved away or whatever. Still 30 of us are quite involved. 20 of us, I would say, are very involved, and we actually also pay a few people now as freelancers, but there is a bit of money to pay the central positions. And the way that we've organized ourselves from the start is in working groups. So we have a few people that do the program group, which looks at all the applications that come in from people that want to collaborate with us, come to the site, have project ideas. There's a garden group that looks after the garden. There was a bar group that looks after the bar, which runs as a separate entity because we're not allowed to make any money actually. So the bar is its own thing, runs on donations. We also have a production group, a communication group. Very crucially, we also have a lobby group because it's very hard to be where we are, and it's a constant fight, which includes a lot of lobbying. More about that later, I would say. And so, you know, it wasn't included, like you can be a member of many groups if you want, like, so there's some people that are more involved than others, but basically, this structure we've kept since the start, but we've iterated on it. And so, this is from last year, a updated graphic that just shows the sort of paid positions. So we kind of designed a structure for like what we think we need in order to run as the space that we want to be. And this is an iterative process as well, right? So we decide this, we designed this, so we can also redesign it, and we do this. And actually we're right now in the process again of looking at what did we like this year, what didn't we like this year, were we fair to everybody, was all the work that we think should be paid for, because make no mistake as well, there's still plenty of volunteer work going into it as well, and sometimes it's very hard to sort of draw the line between what's the paid job and what's the volunteer. Like, if you've ever worked in a collective or a larger group like that, you'll be familiar with these topics. Okay, and so as this sort of rough structure just sketched out for you, we have produced Floating program on site. And so this is just kind of a very complex drawing that shows you a little bit the complexity that we exist in. So we exist from January through to December, but we're actually only on site with program for May to October. The animals around are always present, and there's a lot of contact between us and the animals. You could just hear the crows, you can hear frogs often, little swallows. So, we call ourselves a nature culture site with the intent that we are part of nature and not separate from it. But yeah, we just wanted to give you a quick overview of what actually happens at Floating. So this is a graphic updated very recently. So this is up to date. Yeah, and so just to get you to understand what the different strands of program are that we have. So we have some Floating program, which means that we have some members that are cultural producers, curators, artists, with ideas to do stuff at Floating, right? And so they apply for their own funding, separate of our structural funding, to do their own program. Sometimes it's a collaborative effort between many members, sometimes it's one member with an existing practice that happens. And so this is one strand of program that happens throughout the year. Another strand is what we call landscapes, and that's all the academic collaborations. And that can also take different shapes and forms. For example, sometimes students come for a whole semester, and their whole semester work is based at Floating, and they really design for Floating, or they're just at Floating and kind of deal with topics that we deal with. Or they just come for a day, or a weekend, or a week for a workshop, or a block seminar, or whatever. So this is the whole academic strand. That was basically the only strand we had in the first year. So that's our foundation. And then we also have Kids University, which is similar, a series that goes throughout the whole year, and it's collaborations with schools, not universities. And kids have the opportunity to come and learn very experientially, right? So the kids come in the basin and they touch the mud, they touch the reeds, they feel the wind, they listen to the birds, they put some algae in a jar and look what happens, 3 weeks later. So kind of stuff like this. And then we have on and off-site corporations. So on-site corporations are people that approach us, or we approach them and invite them. But basically, all kind of people that are not part of Floating are invited to approach us with ideas. So I guess you could all approach us with ideas. And basically, if it fits and we think it's nice and it really fits our yearly theme-ish, we don't really have that, but so if it fits and it's nice and we have space and capacity, we try to make it happen. And offsite corporations is something that's a bit more recent, I would say. So now that we're on the map, so to say, sometimes we get invited to go other places. And so we have an ongoing cooperation right now called South Design with 2 sister sites of Floating, one in Sao Paulo and one in Jakarta. We did a collaboration last year with some people from Madrid of the Institute for Post-Natural Studies, which was very cool. So you can see there's lots happening, okay? Basically, that's the point I want to get across. But the lecture title is Learning with the Trouble, right? And so all of this has, in one way or another, something to do with learning, right? Sometimes it's very explicit in the academic sense, and sometimes it's more tacit, and sometimes it's more like artistic research, or like body work, like embodied movement style practices happen as well. But this educational thing is always really central to what we do. Okay, and now a quick run through of this is like a slideshow now, yeah? So just showing you a little bit and giving you an idea of what can happen here. Encounters can happen here. Situated experiences can happen here. We have lots of hospitality. Actually, there were a few slides missing, weren't there? Yeah, there you go. Talks and lectures happen here. Performances, this you've seen. And hospitality actually is another sort of central element to Floating. We really like to cook together and to have discursive dinners with food. And actually there's another motto, third motto now that we have. That's also from the first year, coined by you guys, I think, the UDK students at the time. and that was everything is of equal importance, right? So that meant all of the reproductive work that goes into creating cultural programs. So all of the cleaning, cooking, like feeding people, organizing the space, putting the tablecloth on the table, having toilets that run and are sort of clean, right? All of this stuff is as important actually as the curation or the programming or the giving the lecture, right? And so actually, to the day, the hospitality element is super central to us. And you can see that in our architecture as well. Our kitchen is very much central and elevated and super prominent on site. Although it could have been used more last year, but... Okay, and then just some examples of program that happens. Climate Care is a festival that's just happened this year again. The third version of it happened. That's a very big program. It's 10 days long, and it's got all day workshops, lectures, what else? Readings. Every day after lunch there was a reading on different topics. But this 2021 version was called the Rewilding Years. This year the theme was hybridity and eco-governance, which Jeanne co-curated. Assistant curated. So this is a big thing that happens every couple of years. Kids Uni I spoke to. We had a free radical thing that I wasn't actually part of at all. What was it?
It was an open call for student-led initiatives, so any group you might want to form without a teacher, so teacher-less student-led initiatives to come and make a proposal what they could do with the floating site over a semester. So we had crazy ideas and many, like 20 groups of students, or actually anyone could be a student, just joining the site. It was in 2021, so I think it was also very interesting to have students that have had a year of hybrid or digital learning really come and engage with the site. It was really nice.
Okay, another one is the neighborhood network that organizes a bit more of an outreach style program. So we really reach out to the allotment gardeners that we're surrounded by on site. So literally on all sites we have allotment gardens, but also beyond that to the wider neighborhood. And this is it's a bit of an open door day or weekend that happens a couple of times a year. We had a project called Water, Earth, Biodiversity that was what it sounds like. It looked at soil and water on site and how to filter it and make it better. We also have movement-based practices. This is a series called Contaminations, curated by Catherine Ball. Didn't say anyone else's name. This happened last year. Re-educate me, learning from pre-Edo Japan, wasn't that right? Yeah, so pre-imperial Japan. Very, very interesting stuff to learn there, because they were an island, super isolated, and had to be very, very resourceful. And then sometimes slightly more spontaneous programs happen as well. So readings, talks, seminars. And of course, we have a kitchen. We also have a sauna. We have a compost and a garden and toilets. And you can see people sitting in a hot tub, which also exists. And so, we have fun on site as well. And as we said, everything is of equal importance. Oh yeah, the water. Just to give you an example of a topic, right? So topics range from right to the city, how do we want to live together, cohabitation, hosting, but also urban water cycles, soil. Honestly, it's quite broad. Recently, mushrooms have featured a lot, which I think is a trend overall. But so water, to pick one out, we've had as a topic forever, makes sense in a rainwater retention basin. And so we've looked at how to deal with our own grey water, our own black water, but also with the basin water, and have gone and done a bunch of different water filtration tests over the years. All of it, I have to say, prototypical. It never worked at scale fully, but knowledge created nonetheless. And also we've gone and done some water testing and found out the water quality, being street runoff and all, it's not clean, right? But it's also not too bad, actually. It turns out it's only medium bad. Okay.
Yeah, maybe you've kind of seen glimpses of what it looked like. We've been jumping a bit within the picture you saw between years, and that's something to say about Floating University, is that it does never looked twice the same, or maybe it has now for 2 years, but before that it was really an architecture that reiterated itself. So we were mostly building and unbuilding, and then building again, and always changing, and also asking ourselves, how do we want to build, and what are we learning from the structure we've built in the past year, and what do we like, how can we implement this learning in a future structure? So this is 2018. That's kind of the picture you would find if you Google Floating University. Maybe some of you had. It's quite dense. In the middle, it's quite high. Actually, there is something interesting, that the amount of scaffolding also goes for the amount of funding in the year. So we had more funding. It was the first year we went quite big. And then that's 2019, very small scale. It was only made with leftover scaffolding, leftover wood, and leftover money. So we had this one smaller space in the middle. What you can see, the other building on the left side of the image are buildings that kind of stayed throughout the year. It's like our, let's say, our base ship or something. It's structure built by Atelier Bauau, a Japanese architecture office. And it's been there since 2018. It was a building that it's made out of wood. It was not made to be outside, and yet it has survived, let's say, the last 5 years. It's been very comforting place for us to work throughout the year, because also sometimes in winter we have to be there. And the rest of the structure, most of them change. So that's how it looks like during the day. And eventually this is how it looks like today and how it was built in 2021. So we kind of changed the concept. We will talk a bit later about how we conceptualize this architecture. It's not an idea out of nowhere. It's a process in itself. But this is how you would find the site if you come tomorrow, let's say. You can see it's much more dispersed. It was also, I think, a consequence of post-COVID time. There was this need for spaces that would give more spaces, so that not everything is so, not so dense. And you can see on the right that the ecosystem is thriving. Actually, it's a nice picture to see that the plants I was speaking about, the reeds, they are also creating a habitat for small trees, for willow to grow. So we are really seeing the succession of an ecosystem, which is one of kind of a lake or a mid-wetland into maybe a humid forest. This is how it looks at night. We worked a lot in the past years with inflatables. This is an inflatable roof. And a reason for this is that we think it is a way to create big spaces with few resources. And it's a roof that is inflated all night and all day long. It's actually a very small ventilators, and it doesn't cost so much energy because it's self-regulating. And yet it gives quite impressive spaces. This building on the left, is made out of reed also. So in this year we try to work much more with biomaterial rather than purely wood plank or scaffoldings. That's a picture of the auditorium, which has an interesting shape. I think a better picture will show it later. And it's a site that lives throughout the weather and is also not always clean, right? It's like not always the perfect space. It's not always a picture. And it requires a lot of maintenance. A lot of this structure needs almost daily care so that you can fix the plank that is not right or that is getting moldy because of the water. And interesting to say is that the site does get flooded from time to time. So now what you see is one of its driest states. And like we said, as soon as it rains, the water collects or is collected in the basin and remains there for, it depends of the amount of water, but I'd say for a few days at most, and then it flows out. So we have kind of this tidal rhythm of sometimes a lot of water and then very little, and then it rains again. And around this whole area collects about 10 times more water than its surface. So it's kind of a multiplicator. You're there, it's raining a lot, and you can feel it because it's raining on you, but suddenly there is this like 10 times more water coming into the site. So it can go quite fast. And then suddenly producer have to run around and bring every electronic devices up to 1.50 meters or something. Otherwise it's wet. And
we've had moments where we were there in our underpants trying to save some papers and electronics, bring them one level higher. And then we jumped in the blow-up boat and just paddled around for fun. This
happened. Yeah. That's the roof of this auditorium that I was speaking about. And now we'll get you through a typical year at Floating, because as you can see, we're mostly outdoors. We're completely open to the weather, to rain, wind, sun, everything it can also do to, like, it affects the way you work. It's not like working in an office or in a cubicle, for sure. And we realized that the architecture is iterating, and we're also iterating ourselves. So let's say we start in winter. So we would start now. Right now we're in this phase where we're more into preparing for next year. We're applying for funds because, as Joran mentioned, we are publicly funded, and each year we have to run after the fundings and really make our own budget for the upcoming month. And it's a lot about planning. So we are working on the architecture for next spring or next summer. It's a process that happens within the association, in which we ask every association member to come and give their impressions about how the architecture was until now and how they wish it could be. For this, we also invite semi-external experts or people that have more precise knowledge on some topics, for example, biodiversity, succession, or structural engineers, or so. And we do so with very common online tools. Maybe you know this. And then we have this platform which is called Slack, which is wonderful and a chaos. And it's like all our communication happens in this way, and we are many people, so it's communication is a big part of the work. And then suddenly, eventually, finally, it's spring again, and now we come into this moment of building, repairing, and maintaining the site and the existing structure. So we come up with a lot of funny ideas how to collect water. That was our collection roof of 2018. And then there is about 2 or 3 weeks of collective building. And this moment is really important. It's really central because it's kind of like launched the season. And it's also a moment where we're open, and a lot of this work is also done voluntarily by people who are just interested in the project and joins and want to learn from building and using tools and have also skills to share. And it's a moment of conviviality, and this is how we built this reed facade I told you about. This is the backstage, or like the making of the inflatable roofs, which we build and inbuild each season. This is the kitchen, and Joran also said it's a quite important and central part. This is where you gather. This is where you actually exchange and connect with people. Yeah. This is a picture of a filtration system that we had in 2018, which like water was very central in this year even more. And we had this old filtration system that would run through the structure we built through different bathtub. And this one was filled with plants, so it's a kind of phytofiltration. And we had different plants filtrating different substrate in the water. And then we had, let's say, a bathtub that would be full with sand, another one that would be full with coal or active coal. And eventually, after all these steps, the water was cleaner than it was in the beginning, which was the goal. And last but not least, we realized over the years that our architecture or our impact, our presence on the site is not something you can completely separate from the biotope or from the ecosystem. And it kind of like there are moments of entanglements where the plants have used the structure, or like maybe around our structure, the mud or the soil could accumulate a bit more faster, or in a way that it made more space for other species to settle and to thrive. And that's an example of this. Another thing that we do, we not only build spaces or architectural spaces, you can say we are also gardening a lot, and I think that's, or like we have this group that come every week and take care of the garden. And that's all happening already in spring. And then the season only starts actually, and it's summer, and we have all this program that we talked about, and it's full, and every day there's something else happening. And eventually we're exhausted, and in fall we have to shut down again, and we deconstruct, and we go into fixing what's been broken or what needs to go away for the winter, because not everything is winterproof. And this is a very bare floating from 2018. And slowly but surely we go into the site hibernation. So the site sleeps, and meanwhile the association plans further the next year. And it's like, so far it's been an endless circle. Although every summer we have this kind of anxiety that it's the last summer. Will we get a permit? Will we get money? That's the next chapter.
Right, so a little recap in the middle maybe. We've told, like the theme is learning, right? So we've talked about the learning that happens in the programs we have, in the program we put on, the program that comes, the academic, the kids. There's also learning in just being an association and iterating on our own structure, right? We're learning how to be an association, basically. We're also learning with the architecture, what happens when you put a thing like this, like an architecture like this, in a site like this, that's open and floodable and can attract animals and plants, right? And we're learning this, and we're iterating on how the site works for us as well. So there's learning on many levels, and often it's troublesome. Like it's not always fun to be in the rain and the wind and the sun, or work out how to be an association. There's trouble for all of this learning. So learning with the trouble is an appropriate title for the lecture. But now we'll get to the last chapter in this lecture series, or in this lecture. And that's the real trouble of the politics behind the site. Because of course, we're in the middle of Berlin. It's not just like, yes, you do, go ahead. It's a very competitive site. It's contested. There's many different imaginaries floating around for it. And just to give you the very basic structure of it, there's the city-state of Berlin. That's the administrative level of the whole city. Then there's districts that have their own government and their own politics and their own things that they want to say something about, right? And then we have a company that is city-owned, that is our landlord. We don't actually pay rent, but we have an agreement with them that we can be on site, right? So it's these sort of layers. Then there's us as an association, and then there's just the basin itself and the wetland ecosystem and its inhabitants, right? And so it's kind of this multi-layered thing. And all of these players, let's say, actors, have a different idea for the space. So in politics, stuff like this floats around, right? Where someone just says, oh, how about we build some housing and go to an architecture firm, and they come up with this shit. Then there is, there's other ideas as well, right? There's currently ongoing, actually, a planning process that is supposed to turn the whole thing into sports fields, which is also funny because we're surrounded by sport fields, literally on all sides. I think we don't need more in that exact location. So you can see, right? There's different ideas in the political sphere. Then we have the Tempelhof GmbH, which is that city-owned company that is our landlord, and they have the very basic task of maintaining the basin, right? So they are tasked with the upkeep of the infrastructure, the very gray infrastructure. And this is already giving you a hint of how they interpret that task. Then we have the district level Office of Nature Protection with the task of protecting the biodiversity on site, which they do with, for example, putting an amphibia fence here, which actually didn't work at all. And then there's us, with a self-prescribed task or mission of opening the site that was closed for 90 years to the public, and situating ourselves next to this ecosystem and trying out this nature culture research ecology program site. And then again, there's the ecosystem itself that is trying to mind its own business. And this layering, right? So you can imagine this as a stack. There's the grey infrastructure, the basin, the concrete. Water comes in, hangs out, goes out, super basic, does that today still. Then there is the green infrastructure, with all the plants that grow on site, and the blue infrastructure, the water. And then there's us, the socio-educational, cultural infrastructure. And these three things are coexisting in a very strong hierarchy at the moment, right? So the highest mandate goes to, you can guess it, the concrete, correct. Yes. So it means that whatever the concrete needs, the concrete gets. And that means what happens is that the company that runs or is responsible for the maintenance of the basin comes in with these bulldozers and literally bulldozers parts of the ecosystem to clear the outflow or just to clean for like no reason, literally. And the second highest mandate goes to the ecosystem, so the natural protection. Everything that is not touched by bulldozers is protected, and it's actually a quite valuable wetland habitat, so good that it is. But it leads to a very paradoxical situation where the bulldozers can come in and just bulldoze the place, but at the same time we're being told by the Environmental Protection Office that we're not allowed anymore now to walk around the basin with our rubber boots on because frogs. You know, we don't want to kill the frogs, so that's fine. And actually, the ecosystem is the whole raison d'etre, we're there, kind of. So, but you can see how this is paradoxical and infuriating, especially when it extends to the entire concrete surface. So there's areas that aren't muddy, and we're not even allowed to step on them. And so when they told us last year that we're not allowed anymore, we reacted promptly by putting up signs like this that say, stop. Walking on the concrete surface is prohibited for environmental reasons, which is, of course, stupid. And then the shock happened earlier this year. We got an email on the 23rd of March by the company, actually by the sub-company that has the job of actually driving the bulldozers. They emailed us and said, we found out that someone has irrigated feces, so that's poo-poo and pee-pee, into the basin. It's very toxic. We have to clean immediately. Right? And so we answered that email by saying, okay, how did you find that out? Can we see? And also, you're not going to touch the reeds, right? Because they can actually filter water. I don't know if you know. They ignored that email, and 4 days later, they came in with the bulldozers, and we came in a few hours later that day and were presented with the complete erasure of the entire ecosystem. And it looked like this. It became a parking lot. All of what was the ecosystem was then on this, at this point where the photo was taken, the pile had already shrunk, but was just one big pile of reeds, willows, and whatever else was in there. And this happened in March, which is the middle of breeding season, right? This was a shock. Imagine being a nature culture site, and then this happens to the nature on site, right? And it really showed us our position, and it really made sure, or like made clear this hierarchy, and also this word that we picked up later in the year with the program, actually, this word toxicity, right? It shows you, as soon as someone says toxic, it enables the brutalest of measures, right? No questions asked. It's just this, the kill-all argument. When you think of like asbestos, for example, same thing. How many buildings have left the cityscape for asbestos reasons or for other toxic reasons? Things go on. Anyway, that's aside. That's an aside. But we reacted, very quickly kicked into gear and tried to save what we could. So all of these little green bits that you see, oh shit, sorry. All of this, well, I'm not going to point, you can see. All these little trees that you see are the willows that used to stand over there in the ecosystem. We got a little buggy that helped us pull them over, and we put them on little piles of dirt, and we tried to save as many of the reeds as possible here. These are the toilets over there. I should point, no? There, these reeds are saved, all of this. These reeds as well, we saved. Also, this was totally illegal. So they were like, this is toxic mud, you can't move that. We did anyway, thank God. This hole came in super handy, it fit a willow perfectly. And then You saw how that looked like a parking lot just before, right? And they did literally scrape the whole thing. But these reeds are amazing and they're strong, and they had already burrowed into the tarmac of the basin. And so there was little bits of root, like maybe this long, half scraped off, that had survived inside the tarmac, so where the bulldozers couldn't reach, you know? And these little bits of root were enough for the reeds to grow back pretty quickly. And so this was September of the year, right? This is 6 months later. We have an ecosystem again. Hooray. But this is not the end of the saga. The cleaning still happens as well. So we're still in the process. And all of this, we've been for a year in the process of writing a letter of intent, right? Together with the Senate, so that's city level, and with the company that runs the space. Basically to say floating is important and valuable and should be there, and the ecosystem is important and valuable and should be there. And actually the timing of this first massacre of the ecosystem was weeks before we were ready to sign. Turns out we're now still trying to work out how to sign this thing exactly, and it's a slow process. So this is trouble as well, right? And we're trying to work out how we can become more of a hybrid place that actually, because these 3 layers, they're not mutually exclusive at all. This hierarchy doesn't need to exist. There can be a space that has better ecosystem services, where the water is managed much more sustainably. For example, irrigate into the ground to feed the groundwater, treat on site with plant filtration, sand filtration, mineral filtration. And at the same time, it can be a habitat that's thriving way more than it is now. And at the same time, it can be a cultural, educational space. It's not mutually exclusive. In fact, our structures provide habitat. Like, we think of architecture as habitat, especially coming up with the next iteration. And so we're learning how to stay with this trouble as well, and learning from it. And, you know, there's always a new sort of thing. But that's also the thing. If you want to do something like this, right? This category doesn't exist of water, plants, infrastructure, culture, all in one place. All these different infrastructures have different rule sets attached to them. And this category is just not a thing. And if you want to do it anyway, it means you have to grind, right? You have to really rub out the existence of this place. And so we just accept that as the challenge. It's what we have to do to be there. And so the fight goes on. Right. Maybe that's it for now. Okay, thank you. Now we have lots of time for questions. Thank you. Thank you for listening also. It is truly question time. You have the opportunity to ask whatever. I'm sure there's questions. It's a pretty, I mean, we showed you lots of stuff. Mm-hmm. So how do we get our funding was the question. Good question. It's very, very hard, and we have to fight every year to get our funding together. Same as fighting for even being allowed to be there. And so we pull together from different strands. Most of our funding comes from sort of Berlin level cultural funding, most of the program funding anyway. Last year we got most of our more structural funding from not the culture department, but the department for urban planning or urban development. But yeah, we have to really go look that way, and like pull together all these different strands. We have a little rule internally that each funding, 10% of it goes to the association to be able to run. So yeah, it's a fight. And you'd think it gets easier, no? We won the prize in Venice in 2021. We now recently won the New European Bauhaus Prize. And you think like, okay, now we've made it, right? Turns out these prizes kind of don't go further than the architectural community, at least the Venice one. The Bauhaus one is still new, we'll see. But it's still so hard for us just to be allowed to be there and to have a little bit of funding. Oof. Yeah.
So we're actually about 60 now. And we started as people that were involved in the project, and we grew from this. So we started maybe with 30 and now we're 60 in a quite organic manner, people coming in and out. And first, I think we call ourselves an artist-run organization, which is an easy way to say we have a whole very different backgrounds. And I say very different. Let's face it, we're also maybe every one of us from the same bubble. So we have to do with either architecture, design, the arts in general, or curating, and we have different nationalities. I think Berlin is quite a cosmopolitan city. So, for example, I'm French. I'm not the only one. We have many French people. We have, I think, at least 10, maybe 8 different nationalities in the association. Not everyone from the association is in Berlin. So we have also maybe, I think, a third of our members that are more like off-site members that sometimes reconnect, or sometimes participate in this like very, we have a monthly assembly meeting. So everybody meeting either on site during the summer or on Zoom during the winter. And sometimes we have the surprise that we are 40 people in the Zoom, and that's great. And otherwise we're maybe 20 and yeah. Our age range. I think we go from 24, 25 until how old is?
Maybe like 60. That's roughly all right.
Yeah. And we have the kids, right? So the kids are not part of the association, but they are a very important part of the program we do, nonetheless.
I would say it's overall a pretty like diverse in terms of languages, also in terms of age, space. It is overwhelmingly white space, I would say. So that's something we actually try to work towards, to diversify a little bit.
Well, I think at some point the questions, I saw that not anyone from the association would answer the same. For me, I'd say I'm a bit afraid of the permanence idea. I think we're not there to stay forever. We're not there to do yet another thing that will be there for 500 years or something. And we are really, it has to stay organic and changing. So let's say now we are fighting so that our voices or our use of the space is recognized, but maybe it's also fine in 50 years if something else comes up and maybe we're not or maybe also in 10 years, it's fine, I don't know. But we also have a group, actually, like Joran mentioned, we are organized in different groups. We have one group which is called hybrid infrastructure, which vision or which process is to build a vision so that the site gets rid of its hierarchies of infrastructure or of uses and really try to think it through hybridity. So what if the site would become all of this, and not only because it's already happening and like, okay, it's an overlapping and we're dealing with this, but really embedded in the structures and eventually into transforming the existing infrastructure from a collection pond into an infiltration pond, which would make a lot of sense into the sponge city schemes and the fact that it makes sense to collect rainwater and let it infiltrate where it falls and not have it transported and collected through many sewage pipes, let's say. So one vision would be to turn it into an infiltration pond, and it's not only our vision, also the landlord and the Senate, like people are thinking in this direction, and now we're working into making this in a way that it still allows for cultural programming to happen, and it filters the water in a way that is maybe a bit more experimental, in that it also doesn't erase the ecosystem in the making. So we are... That was my answer. Now, if Joran would answer, maybe he'd say something.
I'd say the exact same thing. We want,
good.
We want the same thing. Infiltration basin is the big vision that we're working towards, and our job is just to make sure that it's not just a techno solution. you know, from concrete to infiltration, that's it, but rather to keep the complexity of the site, the hybridity, and yeah, we want to make sure we have a seat at the table.
And maybe also on a much shorter term, the structure we build, we know that they will not be there forever. So it kind of allows also for experimenting and from maybe a kind of playfulness in the architecture and in the material we use. And I don't know if you said you're building some temporary, like thinking about temporary structure is also thinking about what material you use, and it's not the same if you build only for one summer, for example. And then sometimes we have good surprises that a reed facade actually survives 2 summers and 2 winters and still looks okay or pretty good, whereas we thought after 1 summer probably we have to take it down. So we also, yeah.
Do you mean like personally, or with the? Well, this infiltration basin is the big vision, right? That's the future plan. And to get there, I guess we'll keep lobbying. We are in talks with the Senate, with the district, with the environmental people. We try to wiggle our way into these processes, make sure that we're there when that happens. Right. What else? What's our plan? Do you know, I think the reason that we're still there, even though it's difficult to be there, is that the site really gives back, right? We're like a pretty motley crew of people. We don't have the same opinion on everything at all. Like our assemblies that we have once a month are often conflictual, right? It's fine. Like we have a pretty good discussion culture, so we work through it all. But yeah, we don't agree on everything. And the reason that we're all still there and we're all still happy to put in this pretty annoying work sometimes is that the space gives back. It's like super rewarding to be able to come here and present a project that hopefully you have found some inspiration in. And like people come on site and they're like, oh my God, the space is amazing. That's super rewarding. And it gives us the opportunity, young people like us who have graduated pretty recently, to do our own program, to do our own research, to experiment and try stuff out, right? And so each of us has the opportunity to do that, and that's just that. And so that makes it okay to keep fighting, no?
But so the question is about the one building that stayed throughout the year, built by this Atelier Bauau. How it came out, I mean, Atelier Bauau and Raumlabor, the architecture collective from Berlin, which started the project, are friends, let's say. And Atelier Bauau built this one wooden structure to be put in an exhibition space in Haus der Kulturen der Welt first. So it was like an indoor kind of playful architecture, mostly thought towards kids. So the nothing is standardized, and it's quite playful, and there are many levels, and it's quite nice. It's not best suited for an office, which is now actually one of its function. And then from this exhibition space, it was put into the only building which was big enough to host this structure, which is one, like, let's say 2-story high. Which is the Tempelhof Airport building. And it stayed there, and it was used again for and by kids for a few months. And eventually, through some negotiation and also the will of Atelier Bauau, I think, to see this architecture live further, it was transported. So it was built and unbuilt multiple times. And then I was there once when we unbuilt it from Tempelhof, and then we built it again on the basin. And where we put it, it stayed. So it's... yeah, that's how
we added these walls that are movable all around, and we added a roof.
Yeah, true.
So that's how it's possible to stay outdoors, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a cool building. Like when you come, it's a very fun architecture. Lots of different levels, lots of different nooks and crannies. Not that usable, I have to say, for some of the things we try to use it for. but fun nonetheless.
Can I go back and look for a picture?
Yeah.
Here. It's this building in the back with like these very tall doors.
Laser point.
Which you
This one.
maybe cannot say there are doors, but there are actually doors.
Yeah.
Wow, so much stuff.
Yep.
Here again. Oh yeah.
Oh, unfortunately.
This we didn't bring, but it has. I mean, it evolves through this reason, right? So like when it rains, there are especially algae that colonize the water. And when it stops raining and it dries, the algae, they just stay and they decay and they ferment and it's very muddy. And so for some time, it really smells bad. But it's also the smells every time I go there, I'm like, it's a bit like home, you know, like you didn't choose it, but it's kind of.
Sometimes it smells really nice when someone's cooking.
Also, sometimes it smells
sometimes
super
it
nice.
smells like fire because we heat up the onsen or the sauna.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, a smell-based experience as well, I would say. Yes.
Seasonally also, not throughout the whole summer. I say in August they start getting a bit, like end of July they get a bit noisy, and then they're there until, let's say, beginning of September. At the same time, we have the wasps that come and just like eat everything they can find, any sugary, meaty thing. And
actually, this year the mosquitoes weren't so bad because the ecosystem was killed.
Yeah.
And the water was allowed to flow out much faster. Last year already as well, when they just cleared the outflow. But towards the end of the season, we were now able to put a dam in front of the outflow to keep a higher water level. But that was too late in the year for mosquito larvae. So this year was fine. Next year, hopefully, more mosquitoes. Yeah. Most stuff stays. Most stuff is just allowed to get cold.
Looking for it.
Those inflatable roofs we took down once, but then decided it's not worth it. They're old now. I mean, that's the storage, yeah. But I guess about the buildings, no?
Yeah, about the buildings. But we have like what we reuse, we do store on site. And that's also the way we are allowed to have a few buildings on site during winter, is that we say it's a storage space. So we're not there, we're not doing programs, everything look quite the same, but nobody notices. And these two buildings in the front, like now you can only see their roofs, it's our workshop area and a storage for tools and for material. So it's also meant so that we can build on site, and so we can have this workshop place.
Yeah, and all our tech that we need for talks and stuff, we just bring to someone's basement in the winter. Yeah. 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 You're asking if it's possible to participate, right? Absolutely. We have opening times. You can come whenever. Thursday to Sunday, we just open. There might be program, there might not. Every Thursday we have Thirsty Thursday, which means the bar is open regardless of program.
But volunteering or like participating maybe in the building moments or in the end building moments or into some special festival moments, it's usually made through a call for volunteers on our social media channels. And then you see the call and then you send an email and you say why you're interested and why also it would make sense for you. And then you just come. I mean, you would have to come to Berlin, and we're not allowed to sleep on site. So some things have to be organized, but it's really important that people also participate and engage.
But those are actually basically the only opportunities you just said, because we don't like to have volunteers too much, because we like to pay everyone for what they do. So we try to reduce it to a minimum, but these building moments at the start and the end of the season are a good opportunity for volunteers, and it's actually also a really fun time, and you learn a lot, and you get to build stuff, and there's lunch, and it's like communal, it's nice. So we feel like maybe that's fine, but outside of that, not so many opportunities. But I also said everyone's invited to approach us with an idea for a project to do on site, and if it makes sense and we have time and capacity to host you, that could be another avenue of involvement. Sure. Couple weeks.
Yeah, I think
Depends
3
how big
weeks.
the building action is, no?
Yeah.
So bringing this back out of hibernation is a week, maybe a week and a half,
2 weeks.
2 weeks. If we build everything from scratch, it's a bit longer.
Yeah.
But either way, it's like super lightweight architecture. It's fairly easy to put up and take down. Yeah, it's not a massive dig or anything like that. Right, what is the time? Do we have more questions? Yeah, I mean, I've got time. Go on, what is it? Oh, just waving, no problem.
Hi.
Uh-huh. Yeah, home office does become more prominent. Some of us also take the opportunity to go away, for a few weeks or whatever. So we work more online, but we also have a little winter office that we share with another initiative right now. It's not as nice a place as we have during the summer, unfortunately. I wish we did. But that's not a funding question, I guess.
And one time during the winter, we actually built some kind of warm space, warm room within this mothership structure, like it's called the urban forest. I will give it a name, so now we know what we're talking about. This is the urban forest, and we build a kind of with like demountable wall and a small heater, and we kind of tried to make it a space to work, but we realized it's so exhausting that you really cannot, like, in summer it's fine to be like impacted by the weather. It's part of the job, and it also helps you to tune in with the site. But in winter it's really hard. So like computer
Also,
work,
we don't have any water in winter.
really hard. We also don't have any water, so we don't really have toilets, and so you have to bring your own water from home if you want to drink. So it's not very hospitable. But we have some very resilient programs that also do movement workshop in the winter, or that they just fire up the sauna, and so it's not maybe the most classical work stations, but they can also be productive.
No. No, part-time. Both of us have one of those jobs that I showed, right? Those jobs. So we're just freelancers with different capacity. Jeanne is part of the communication team, and I'm part of the production team. So I have a couple days more than you, or 1.5. But it's all part-time. And we do other stuff. Yeah.
But it's interesting that also in a freelancer life, like I work 1.5 day for floating per week from March to October. So it's not much. And what we try is that we pay everyone equally. So everything is of equal importance. So no matter what you do, you'll get the same amount. And you should put the same amount of work into what you, like, we're trying to figure out things like this. But although it's not very much, and it's a bit precarious, because every summer you have to ask yourself, is this going to last another round? Or you have to work throughout the winter and say, maybe in April we actually don't have the money to pay the work you already did. So we're kind of struggling with this precarity. I must say it's one of the stablest thing I have as a freelancer, and I'm really happy about it.
Yeah, but it's true. No, sometimes we work months at a time without knowing if we're going to get the pay for it. The precarity is the backdraw for sure.
Concept of the place. Are there some findings of your group of changes in habitation?
Animal habitation.
No, like, what do you mean habitation? In
interpretation of architectural
Yeah. I think we're quite far from anything classical, and so I'm not sure we can take our learnings directly into some kind of housing project or bigger scale project. It does have it is effective, like the water filtration system. I think if you would think this through into a building, you could definitely find something that is useful to manage your rainwater or to incorporate plants or habitat within your systems. But it's also not, I think, our goal. I think we're not into trying to find solution or to be, let's say, going towards a progress or productivist of classical architecture. I think we kind of separate a bit from this, and we have this playground which offers other opportunity, and I think we're still learning, and maybe at some point there is one construction method where you say, oh, I can use it in another project, but it will maybe not look like a house or a building.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Not sure that was exactly the question.
No, was it not?
But I also don't know exactly what the question was. You talked about performativity and what we learned from that.
I mean, something that I think is performative about the architecture, for example, is that spaces are easy to change or to transform, or we are trying to make them easy to change and to transform. Then after that, it's up to each one of us to actually make the step and change it, but it's kind of thought within the concept. For example, this roof that we have, like I'm not sure if you see them, but these like white bubbles, they are roofs, and one of them slides from one side of the site, the smaller one, onto two metal railings to the other side. To do so, you have to perform the act of, for example, dragging the roof over 15 meters, so to say.
Which has quite an effect on people under the roof.
Yeah, and it kind of changed the shadows. It also has light inside, so at night you can change where the light will drop, and I think that's for me, like that's what I understand as a performative architecture. But maybe that's my take.
We also have these mats that we can use to transform any surface into a soft surface that can be used for dancing. So that's really useful. And another actor in the performance of the space, of course, is the weather, right? You see very different kind of structures of people on site according to the weather. When it's sunny, when it's really sunny and hot, people are trying to cram in the little shady spaces that we have. When it's raining, there's a bit more space because, rain comes down like that and not like that. But yeah, the site really changes and becomes usable in a different way with different weather conditions. I guess that's interesting also. Sorry. Okay. Yeah.
We are not
Good
the
question.
first initiative, so I think we are learning from the success of other initiatives, right?
Yeah, we see ourselves actually so Berlin has a history of civic engagement in urban development, right? We just spoke about this before the lecture actually, but so Berlin, I guess maybe you could start earlier, but starting with the squatting movement in the 80s, and then the wall came down and there was all this space in the former borderland to be taken and done stuff with. Actually, people were paid to live in Berlin at one point, right? So there was opportunity for people to grab and do something. And so there's a huge sense of ownership in the city. And this has continued. Like the airport that is now a park because people wanted it to be a park. There was a big movement to turn it into a park, and then there was a big referendum to keep it as a park when there were Senate plans for building, right? And so within this lineage, it becomes possible to become floating as well, right? Without that, it would have never happened. And I guess we're doing something new, which is taking an infrastructure that has all this layered stuff. And so we are taking it further, I would say. So far, no one has tried to copy us, I think, but it would be good. I would like there to be some more complex thinking about, or layered thinking even, about different urban spaces. Surely. We try to get the message out there, yeah. All right, a few people are leaving. Maybe it's time to wrap it up. Thank you so much for staying until now and for your interest and listening and your questions. And I hope you can take something away from this. Thank you.
Thank you.